Yeah, I'm just looking forward to hearing Ramphela to talk. She's got such a lovely history behind her, and I just want to see, what she has just meant to the country and to the nation as a whole, and what influence she had to everybody.
As a lady, I am delighted and honored to be here tonight to hear what the most formidable First Lady of South Africa has to say, if not the world. No, in all seriousness, I believe she is a change agent for this country and she can make a huge difference. So I'm really excited and I would like to see what kind of team she's going to build around her.
I think what is very interesting about the good doctor, as I call her, is that she can bring something fresh, something different. And I hope that the South African community is embracing her because I think she is going to come with something different and something exciting that we all need as a country.
Welcome everybody to our 11th Story Sessions event. Very, very, very excited tonight. I know that many of you have been at all of them. Thank you so much. And tonight we're excited to feature Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, a very, very significant woman in our country. And so we're looking forward to hearing her story. I just wanted to share a little story with you as we get kicked off here. You'll know that Don Muller and myself sort of co-founded Story Sessions and do it together. We're from a company called Apple Tree, and a little while ago I was in a workshop because that's what Apple Tree does. We do a whole lot of workshops. We talk to people about work and motivation and how they find meaning in their work and whatnot. And I was sitting in this workshop, and across the room from me was a guy by the name of Walter. And Walter was about 20 to 30 years my senior. He was a black man. I'm a white man. He lives down in a rural area down near Scopra. I live here in the suburbia in Morningside. He takes a train to work. I drive my car to work. And we were talking about work, and Walter began to share the story about his life in this workshop. And he said that in this little township that he grew up, there was this fence. And he used to sometimes walk towards the fence. And this fence bordered on a golf course. And he walked up to a part of the fence that looked onto a driving range. And when he got there, he saw a bunch of white men kind of looking a bit funny, sort of bent over, and they had a glove on only one hand. And they had this long sort of silver stick, and at the end of it there was this white ball. And they would stand there and swat this thing, and then they wouldn't move. They'll just look at it. And some of them would look right, and some of them would look left, and only a few of them would get to look straight as they go straight down the fairway. But somehow Walter found a way through the fence. And somehow Walter found a little steel stick, and somehow Walter found a little white ball, and somehow he managed to hit his first shot. And as he began to share the story, somehow Walter ended up being a scratch golfer. And somehow Walter now has this little academy going where he teaches young kids from the township how to play golf. And in the middle of this workshop, I could tell you what, there was dead silence. You could hear a pin drop. Because all of a sudden race disappeared, and gender disappeared, and stereotypes disappeared. And the fact that he lives down in Scopra and I live up here disappeared. And everybody else started to share in his story. And what began to appear was human connection. And what began to appear was the common ground that we all stand on with the ambition that we have for our lives and the significant things that we want to do for our lives. And the amazing thing is that he wouldn't have been able to share that story if he hadn't chosen to live that story in the first place. And the point about Walter is that Walter didn't just somehow get through the fence and somehow pick up a stick and somehow become a scratch golfer. Walter chose to go through the fence. Walter chose to pick up a golf stick. He chose to hit that ball, and he chose to be a scratch golfer. And he chose to use his story for the benefit of others in teaching these young kids how to play golf. Why we started Story Sessions is because we believe that every single human being has the choice to live a great story. This chair here has had 11 significant people sit in it and share their story. But the one thing that they've all had in common is that they've all chosen to live a great story. They weren't born with supernatural powers. They weren't born with anything different to anything that we have sitting right here in this room. But they became intentional about stepping into a great story. And we just want to say at Story Sessions that we need people in Durban to live the best flippin' story that they can live. The city needs us to live significant stories. This country needs us to live significant stories. And so we will continue to share stories because we believe that the power of a great story is a story that starts in every single person that is sitting in this room. So as you sit here tonight at Story Sessions, listening to Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, may you not only just admire her story and listen to what she has to say, may you think about your own story as well. Is that okay? I have seen a bunch of cell phones. We're going to have a little Twitter-thon here. If you've got a Twitter account, put it out there. There's the hashtags, the Story Sessions accounts. Tell people about tonight. Tell people what's been said here tonight. Share it so that you can start to inspire others to do the same. I'm going to call up Don Muller, who's going to introduce the good doctor.
Part of my story is that I get to work with an incredible man like Travis Gale. And we just really are excited for what's happening in our city. And thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. Durbanites coming out on a Monday night, that's quite a thing. And seeing so many of you, so thank you for coming. And I'm telling you now, you're not going to be disappointed in the story that you're going to hear. We've just had a brief moment talking with Dr. Mamphela Ramphele. And we are so excited to have her with us tonight, for her to tell your story to all of you. She not only is a mother, but she's a doctor, she's an author, she's a politician, she's an activist, she's just an incredible human being and a South African citizen that we can be proud of. So it is a great honor for me to invite up onto stage Dr. Mamphela Ramphele. Well, welcome to Durban. I was really hoping that I pronounced your name right, because I've seen on Twitter this last week that someone got it horribly wrong and you weren't impressed. So did I get it right?
Well, you got it absolutely right. And I just want to say thank you for bringing me back to my city. Many of you don't know that I spent precious 5.5 years here in Durban, from 68 to June 73. So thank you for taking me back to those years.
Great, thanks, Dr. Ramphele. I think a great place to start would be to tell us a little bit about your childhood. I know you were born in Vereeniging, was it? Or, no, sorry, Polokwane. And got you. And your parents were both teachers, I believe. Tell me about those early years in Polokwane.
Well, I think there is one common thing between Polokwane and Vereeniging is that there are some rivers somewhere in the neighborhood. I was born in a little place called Bochum. Now, those of you who know German will know that Bochum is a German name. And it reflects the fact that German missionaries arrived in South Africa and they, amongst other things, set up a mission station, which had a little church, a little school, and a little hospital. And it's in that hospital where I was born, but I was born 3 days after Christmas. So spare a thought for my mother, who had to spend her whole Christmas away from her home, because in those days, there was no transport other than a donkey cart, at best a mule cart. And so Bochum Hospital had little rondavels where mothers in waiting came and lived with a helper in one of those until they went into labor. Then they get taken into the hospital maternity ward where I was born. I was a very unpromising little bundle. I was sickly, I had jaundice when I was small, and I was always small and little with an oversized head. So it wasn't exactly an attractive piece of work. But I grew up in a very loving, huge extended family, because on my father's side, there were 7 brothers. On my mother's side, there were about 6 of them. And then, of course, each one has got, so it was quite a jolly, big family. The nice thing, I was number 3, so I figured out how to negotiate the politics of big families. And the first thing I learned is to be close to my mother, all the time. That's where food came from, comfort, protection. But anyway, going back to the most important shaper of my life was being born to 2 teachers. So education was never a question of whether, or it was a question of how well you're going to do. Failure was not even on the horizon. And so I had this good fortune of getting very high quality education, even though it was during the bad old days of discriminatory education. My parents, my mother taught me grade 1, as they call it now, and she made sure that you knew how to write neatly, and read properly, and spell properly. And my father taught me when I was in the senior primary education side, and so he made sure that you had integrated your knowledge for the primary school level. And so I was never allowed to slack. So, and I was very naughty as a child. So I had to perform at the highest standards. And my father taught me one great thing: don't compete with anybody else. Because I was always number 1. He said, that's not good enough. You have to compete with yourself and always say, okay, what happened to that 1 mark? Why did I get 90-something%? What happened to the other? How do I get the rest? So this high expectation environment was very important for my upbringing. And then I had a mother who was a perfectionist. She was a teacher, a wife, a mother of 7 children, a fantastic cook, fantastic everything. So we were not allowed not to be perfect, which is hard. So I think it's very important that one celebrates the gift of family, the gift of parents who really cared. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. And what we had, we always shared with others. I always had to share whatever I had with 2 or 3 other kids who my father would bring into the home because they were too poor they came to school hungry, they were wearing very broken clothes, and so he'll just adopt them, somerso. So we grew up understanding this notion of Ubuntu. It wasn't a theory, you just lived it.
And going back to your story about being a baby and being quite sickly, I know that you contracted whooping cough, I think it was, as a little baby, and the local Dominie's wife actually saved your life. Tell us a little bit about that, and almost like the kindness of one individual has resulted in you being with us today. Just talk to us a little bit about what happened there.
Well, I did warn you that I had very unpromising beginnings. And being so frail, every little infection that did the rounds in the village would take me. And the unfortunate thing about the 40s or the late 40s is there were no health facilities to speak of. So at 3 months, you get whooping cough. Your chances of survival are very small. And if you do survive, you end up with a chesty chest for the rest of your life. And this woman, we used to call her Yefro, because instead of Mefro, the locals used to say Mayfro, So the dominie said, no, she's my wife, not yours. So he didn't mind them calling her Jofro. That's fine. So he was a very cruel man, very racist man. And he wasn't racist in the sense of he hated black people. He just was a man not at peace with himself. And his wife was such a gorgeous, very kind person. Even her eyes, when she sets them upon, you can just feel the comfort. So he helped my mother nurse me through this whooping cough. Just simple home remedies. A bit of honey, a bit of vapor to just keep the moisture going. And I survived. Surprise, surprise. Perhaps it's a problem that I survived.
Not at all. We're very glad that you did survive. And from what I understand, that same family that helped you survive, a couple of years later, it was also that same family, I think it was more from the Dominie's actions, that you were confronted first with the almost face-to-face with racial discrimination when a lady who had died within the community was not allowed to be buried in the community graveyard. Could you tell us a little bit about that and the impact that that had on you as a young girl?
It was much less about racism, but much more about chauvinism. You know, in those days, you were called a heathen if you were not baptized, and this is what this woman, old woman, was. Now, imagine for a woman who was by then, I think in her late 80s, unless you had been in touch with missionaries quite early on, the chances of you being baptized in the 50s when you are at the age of 80 are very small. And yet this dominie didn't have the common sense and common humanity to simply say, the children of this woman live here, and so it is natural that if she dies whilst visiting them or being nursed by them, she should be buried in the church's cemetery. Nope. She wouldn't be buried there because she was not a baptized Christian. I mean, how unchristian is that? And so that split the village between those who sided with the dominie versus those who didn't. And it ended up having the spillover effects of the freedom struggle because many of the people living in the village were migrant workers. They worked in Johannesburg, in other places, not hired work, they were migrants, laborers. So there was, in a sense, a politicization of that village by the really quite nonsensical approach that this dominie took to the notion of Christian and non-Christian. But be that as it may, it gave the apartheid government the excuse to then move those who disagreed with the dominie on the basis of they were rebels and they didn't belong in the mission station. And of course, once they'd done that, they also took the gap because this was a village at the foot of the Soutpansberg Mountains. Now, those of you who've ever traveled there, I was there a few weeks ago, is the most spectacular, rugged environment. Just on the border, on the other side of the Soutpansberg Mountain is Zimbabwe, and we were on this side of it. You had sparkling water come down from those mountains, evergreen. We had fruit, vegetables right around the year. And so suddenly that was declared a black spot. So we were also moved eventually from that place. But the disruptive effects of that conflict was that my siblings and I, the younger ones, had to be moved back to my father's natal home in the Bochum area. And my father had to remain because he was the principal of the school. So it left a very deep imprint in my mind because that was in 1956. I was young and quite confused about what was happening. And there was no discussion of politics. Things were just happening. And as a child, you're trying to figure out what's going on.
Okay, and then as you sort of got a bit older, we know that you got involved with a bit of the Black consciousness movement. And I managed to get quite a cool photo. If it did have to work. Okay, I don't have the photo working here. But you got involved with a group of people, Steve Biko being one of them. Tell us what was going on in those conversations in those early days. So what were you guys talking about? What were you thinking? What were you believing? What was going through you as a young lady at that stage?
I came to KZN, Natal then, into the second year at medical school. And the reason was simple. As a rural bumpkin, I didn't know if you're going to go to a university. You apply in the first half of the year before you go to university. So I was just sitting comfortably doing my matric, and somewhere in August, I woke up to the fact that I need to go somewhere. So I applied, and it was too late. And so I was very distressed. But my science teacher, who in fact was responsible for my decision to become a doctor, because I was very good in physical science, and I love chemistry. And I told him I wanted to be a chemist. He said, African woman in the late 60s, forget it. It's not going to happen unless you want to go and teach, because you can't be a scientist in this country. Very confusing, because I wasn't politically enlightened. So I just knew, well, bad news about white people keeping us out of these things, but I don't know why. So I arrived here in KZN in 1968, absolutely green from a political point of view. Then I meet up with a young woman who became my friend, Vuyelwa Mashalaba, who introduced me to this circle of friends of hers. They were in the SRC together with Steve Biko, Charles Sibisi, and Gulam Abraham, a whole lot of them. What happened to us is that in our chats as friends, we talk about the frustrations that they were having as SRC leaders, working with white students who seem to have certain assumptions about us. But one day when we were sitting and chatting, we realized that, no, it's not them having a problem. We have a problem. How does it happen that you live here in Africa and someone arrives and calls you a non-European? Hello? How did that happen? Imagine you go to India and you call all the Indians non-Americans or non-British. They will throw you into the Indian Ocean. But somehow we, in South Africa, for generations, including the most active liberation movements of the time, had been accepting this. Some of them even called we the non-European unity movement of South Africa. Whoa. But the day we cracked that code, we realized that the problem is not with white people. Yes, they have some problem, but the primary problem for perpetuating the status was us. When you accept being a negative of somebody else, you're done. You have given away your agency, your self-worth, your self-definition, your self-respect. But that day, we found it. And once that switch clicks into place, it never stopped. And I'm now, 65? Because it's the most liberating act to shift your mindset from being defined by others to define yourself. But it didn't just stop with moving away from non-white, non-European to being black. I woke up the next day or a few weeks later and say, hello, it looks like there is something else that needs to shift. Why am I, as a black woman, accepting a second-class place to black men? Not going to happen. So I raised this matter in my usual way. At that time, I didn't have diplomacy. And they were shocked because the consequences were very clear. In the same way that we said the Black consciousness movement is to liberate black people from being defined by others. Because as Steve put it very well, that the most powerful weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. The day we took that back, they had no tool. Now, for women, the day you take back your mind from being defined by men in terms of what is and isn't appropriate for you, you're done. But we went a step further. We said to our white fellow students, you know what? We have had this mindset shift. You need to also go through this, because with us, we're liberating ourselves from an inferiority complex of being defined by others and seeing yourself as black as a problem. If only I was white. And someone was telling me the other day, which really made me cry, that a young girl whose mother is a domestic worker, when they were asked, what are you going to do when you are old? What would you like to be? She said, a white woman. Yes. Why? She knows her mother is the most powerful, most significant person in her life, and she's seen the mother working for this white woman and be made to do things which she said, this white woman must be more powerful than my mother. That's what I should be, okay? So it's very important to take these issues to the next level. It isn't just about liberating yourself, but it is enabling the liberation of even those who are your oppressors. Because that way, you have the flow of positive energy. When South African black people have completely liberated themselves from an inferiority complex, and white South Africans have liberated themselves from a superiority complex, believe you me, still there. That's the thing you saw on Twitter, that I was being introduced and this person couldn't call me Mamphela. It had to be Mamphela or Ramphele. And when I pointed out, no, my name is Mamphela Ramphele. So when he he was thanking me, he said, well, Dr. Ramphele, I rested my case. So as we were walking out of the door, this very well-meaning old man says to me, you know what? Why don't you anglicize your name? You'll have greater appeal across the nation. So I said to him, do you realize what you're saying to me? This is Africa. Why would I anglicize my name here instead of embracing my African identity? No, I'm just telling you, it's much better for you. So you see, we still have a way to go in terms of this liberation of the mind. And I think if you take it to its logical conclusion, you'll see that we as South Africans, both black and white, post-1994, we went back and fetched the same mindsets that we had thrown away in our liberation struggle. We now gave our minds to those in authority, in government. That's why they're treating us with disrespect, because we have given them our minds you hear my own friends who were with me in the liberation struggle. When I say to them, why am I the only one speaking out against what's wrong? No, Mamphela, you can speak. if we speak, we'll be called racists. At what point do we as South Africans take ownership of the fact that we are citizens of this country and therefore the shareholders of South Africa Inc.? Would you say this about your company where you have put your precious money? That you can't confront the management that's messing up your company because they will call you racist? I don't think you would. You'd bloody well tell them what you think.
Mamphela, you speak about Steve Biko being quite influential in pioneering that thinking. Don't you want to just tell us a little bit about him? Or if I could ask you maybe, how would you describe Steve Biko in your own words and the influence that he had on your life?
You know, during the time when we were in high school and university, although we are all friends, there were always very cruel jokes told of people who came from the platteland. He was one of those, they were called Paris, because they were not smart, they were not streetwise and so on. He was very distinctive because he was very tall, very handsome, very, very smart, but also very personable. He made friends across the spectrum, men, women, black, white, and so on. But it didn't matter that you were his friend, he'll still tell you the home truths. And so it was a big shock to people in the National Union of South African Students, NUSAS, which he was a member of, when he actually confronted them about how they had embraced racism. And it happened at a student conference in 1968 in Grahamstown at Rhodes University. Now, at that time, black people and white people were not supposed to share the same accommodation. But in preparation for the NUSAS conference, there was an agreement that this is likely to be an issue. And when it arises, we as students must stand together in solidarity. The white students must refuse to sleep in residence if black students are not allowed there. Guess what? The white students just quietly disappeared and left the black students standing. And they ended up going to have to sleep at a church. I don't know who of you know Grahamstown. The township was over the hill, sort of, as you go out towards King Williamstown. And there was a cold church. And Grahamstown as buyer goats. In the winter, it was the middle of winter. And they were just left in this, not a carpet, like this cement. And he was so furious. And that's when he decided, that's it. We have to break away from this pretense of non-racialism within the student movement, and black students must acknowledge the fact that they have to fight their own battles. And it is in that context that these discussions took place, informed by the Black Power movement in the US, Negritude movement in West Africa, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We took everything from wherever. And it was a revolution of the mind, which I dare say that business remains unfinished in South Africa. Too many black people still believe in the inferiority of black people. The prime example is this government. What got into their head that 30% is good enough for poor kids, unless they thought they didn't think? They don't trust that black kids can perform at the same level as white kids. So you lower the bar so you don't have failure. So what that has done is that this 73%, 30%, and 40% effectively, the pass rate in this country is under 10%. And if you take math and science, we're talking about 5 to 6%. What a criminal waste of talent. Because every child is born a genius. If you play to their strengths, their talents, they can be ballet dancers, they can be photographers, they could be mathematicians, but you kill their spirit because the government is protecting the teachers who can't do math at the grade 3 level and they're teaching grade 3 math. And it's not because those teachers are incapable, but they were allowed to function in a mediocre system, and it just spirals down. And I think if there is one area where all of us sitting in this room are going to be judged, if you believe in Judgment Day, for our complicity in the crime against our children, is education. And so I really believe this is something that ought to get us out of our seats. And this is something we can change. One of the problems about having re-embraced the powerlessness and given to those in authority the power to make decisions that are clearly not in the interest of the future of the country is that we have given up our agency. So people sit and say, what can I do? Plenty is the answer. Because we have the power in our hands. We are the ones appointing the managers of South Africa Inc. Whether you participate or you don't, you are, by virtue of being a citizen, whether you vote or you don't vote, you are actually making it possible for a particular type of government to be in place. In 2009, 41% of us decided it's not worth voting. 41%. You know what that is? 13 million people chose not to vote. Now, if you think about it, those who voted, therefore, were 17 million people, and they made the decision about which government comes into power. And the government we have today is governing with 38% of the eligible vote. Now you see the consequences of non-participation. You have allowed a minority government to boast about 65% they got. It's 65% of those who voted. And so as we sit here today, we've got to start thinking about the power the one person out of the 10 who voted for them. Let's say the 65, let's round it off if we take the local authority votes of 2011, and you say on average, 6 out of 10 South Africans voted for this government, okay? That is those who voted. Now imagine if you and I were to decide that from now onwards, I'm going to work for a situation where this government, this governing party is brought below 50%. All it takes is each one of us, the one out of the 6 who voted, not to vote for the status quo, but for change. Now imagine if you also mobilize your best friend or your partner or somebody else to vote. You see how quickly you actually can get them to below 50%. But you've got to believe that the country we imagined, which is reflected in our constitution, a prosperous democracy united in its diversity, where 3 key values prevail: dignity, equality, and freedom. That's what we signed up for in 1994 when we were crying and carrying on when we were voting for the first time. Now, there's no point in getting even a marriage. You've got to work at keeping it alive. We carried on, voted, cried, and we went AWOL. We now need to go back to the business of building the country that we dreamed of, the country that we signed up for. So I just think that the kind of mindset shift that I was referring to, it's a lifelong journey. You keep working at it. And what has kept me going is that I learned that the best way of keeping that going is to make sure your personal, your professional, and your political decision-making in terms of those domains are governed by the same value system. You can't have a value system that tolerates corruption in the politics, but you say, no, I'm a Christian, I don't believe in. No, 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 no. If you believe that dignity, equality, and freedom are the things that should characterize South Africa, you've got to live that in the way you conduct yourself with your family, friends, in your professional life, in your business, and in the political decision-making. If you do that, you sleep like me. When I get home, I put my head on the pillow, I'm gone, despite all the problems that are upon me. Because I'm doing my very best. Every day when I wake up, I say, I am going to do my very best to discharge the responsibilities of being a citizen of this country.
Part of your life story was that you, some of the thinking, some of the ideas that you had resulted in you being forced to live in Zanin. And I just want to touch, or just ask you very briefly, just to tell us about the relationship that you had with a particular woman, Helen Suzman. And just because I understand you were doing quite a lot of work with the women in that particular township, but just what influence this woman had in your life.
One of the desperate acts of a regime that had lost all credibility was to think that you can banish people, you can kill them, you can send them to jail and kill the dream. You can't. And so I was banished to Zanin because I'd been so effective working with Steve and a group of us in King Williamstown. Now Zanin at that time was really back of, as Donald Wood called it, back of beyond. No one had heard of Zanin. I had never been to Zanin, but they exactly chose it for purposes of isolating me from everywhere. But the good thing about the medical profession is that you can be anywhere. You can practice your profession. And so I said to them, guys, just calm down. You can put me in a cave with baboons, I'll find something to do. So just don't even worry about it. And so when I got to this community, people were dirt poor. People had pellagra, they didn't know what it was. People used to get mad from pellagra because that's what happens, because it really affects your nervous system as well. It was all about forced removals, because these are people who used to live in Magoebaskloof. Now, look at Magoebaskloof, fertile, beautiful. They took them from there, dumped them in a place called Haskoror, which were nothing. So my being dumped in Zanin was really one of those acts of God, because I could work with that community with very little resources. And we completely changed the whole game. Kids used to die of diarrhea and vomiting because they didn't know how to deal with it. People used to have all this. And that community was anchored by poor women And those women today are the strongest leaders in that community. It had a woman, Chief Make, who was the chief there. And so as we became more and more effective in this comprehensive primary health care with community development elements like childcare centers and so on, the security police went to her and said, this woman is very dangerous. She's a terrorist. Don't allow her to work with your people. She quietly paused for a while and then says, you know what? You have a problem with this woman. She's our doctor. Please continue to have problems with her. We are going to continue to work with her as our doctor. And so we still, when I launched Ahang, it was one of the first places I went to. It's amazing once people get a glimpse of their agency and how they can recover their dignity. That community is unstoppable. It's one of the few rural places in South Africa where every village has got a childcare center and every home has got a little vegetable garden. And people have recovered their dignity. And so I think it was a good thing I was sent there because I also learned a lot. You know, when you are in a circle of supportive friends, you think you're strong. You need to be thrown out there sometimes to really get to see how tough things are. And you learn from the people you work with. But in my case, it also coincided with the killing of Steve Biko. Now you can imagine the trauma of having been thrown there and then the trauma of losing the most important person in my life. It was real hard times. But when you are carrying on and crying and feeling sorry for yourself, and you see all these very poor people, despite even bigger problems, carrying on, you say, what the hell? Get off your whatever and do something. And work became a healing medium. By working with people who also were traumatized, you get healing. So you become a wounded healer. That's what I still am.
Fantastic. I'm going to go on a bit of an honors roll with you quickly, just a bit of a summary of transparency of events. You graduated as a doctor. You then got involved with working at UCT as one of the vice chancellors there. I think the first black woman to ever hold such a post. Went on to become a director of the World Bank and also very involved with the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Getting to work a lot with Nelson and extending his heart. Also a very successful businesswoman. And I guess my question for you now then is, after living such a great story and having worked from having so little to gaining so much and making such an impact, why not just enjoy Camps Bay? Why politics is my question to you.
Well, I still enjoy Camps Bay. But the reality is, when you know what your country is capable of being, I mean, I just want to remind us, there is no other country with the natural resources we've got, the mineral resources we've got, the people resources we've got. Just look at this unity in diversity here. There are very few countries in the world that have got the asset base that we've got. Now, when you look at the asset base and our performance over the last 20 years, you realize that there is a real big problem. And the problem is not the lack of capacity to live the dream. The problem is leadership. And that leadership starts with you, with me. It isn't simply what's wrong with the leadership that's in charge. It is what's wrong with us for allowing them to be there. Which country in the world will have a president facing 700 charges of corruption and becoming president? Show me one. And so what got me out of my slippers into shoes was imagining what this country could be with clean, government run competently, professionally, involving all the talent there is in the country, and making sure every child gets the best education they can get. Every young person who's today walking the street and sniffing zoo being on the job training. Every company that's in the mining or in the agricultural side, conducting their business with tools and knowledge of the 21st century. The infrastructure that we have that's crumbling upon us, we have all the knowledge, all the skills here in South Africa. Imagine if we had a public transport systems across our cities that connects Phoenix with Durban Central seamlessly. But imagine also if we had cities, not apartheid cities like we are building every day with this RDP Vezunia business, but real cities, creative 21st century cities where poor people, middle-class people live together so that the young people can see what they can be, not be part of Gogo as the only role model. Imagine, so it's imagining that future that got me out of my slippers.
I think that's brilliant. Just on that there, what you're saying, we were talking a little bit earlier and you mentioned how important this word hope is for us as a generation, in particular for us as young people in this country. What would you say that word hope is for you, and what is it for our country?
You know, I am very fortunate in having been brought up in a Christian family. I then got fed up with Christianity because it was complicit with the discrimination in this country. But then in my adulthood, I made a conscious decision to return to a spiritual life. It's so, so important to have something larger than you. That's what keeps hope alive. And I'm not talking about God who sits somewhere, just the sense of your soul, your spirit matters as much as your mind and your body, and that we are, after all, when we talk about Ubuntu, is that connectedness. And when you have that, you have hope. Because even when you are lying on your deathbed, you are not a hopeless person. You know, as they say, people who die in the Lord die singing, joyful, because they still have hope. Now imagine now that we have a society which makes sure that every child becomes the best that they can become. Imagine that hope. When I see the vacant eyes of young people, there are about 4 million of them in our country, who are not in school, not at work, and not in training. And that's what one believes we should stop, that theft of hope from those young people. So hope is something that all of us in this room have the power to restore. Start with yourself. Never say, what can I do? Plenty. And when you have hope, you become the light, the carrier of hope to others. I mean, imagine a parent who's always moody, broody, hopeless, depressed. The kids, the family becomes depressed. But when you are living a life of hope, of aspiration for a future that is yet to come, even for the generations that are yet to come, you become the conduit of hope. And I think that's what we in this room ought to be. Because we are here today because you want, as someone said, you want to hear the story of this non-promising starter. But importantly, is how you live your story. I've shared with you the glimpses of my story. Now imagine if all these lights of stories become a momentum of light. It's not possible to extinguish that light. With all of us in this room representing the light that will keep hope alive, that we will have this country of our dream.
Thank you. Brilliant. I want to give opportunity for the people who have come out to ask you questions. So get your questions ready. My last question to you. We at Story Sessions, we really are passionate about Durban. We're really passionate about our city. And one of the labels that often gets put on Durban and on Durbanites is that we're apathetic. Now, what would be your message for us as Durban and for us as Durbanites to really impact the city and impact our nation?
Apathy is born out of learned helplessness. When you feel what you do or don't do doesn't matter. And if I look around here, most of the people in this room are young people, and if I know the demographics of South Africa, the majority population in South Africa is young. It's your age group. So you have to step up to the plate. My generation fought for freedom. And I apologize for failing to follow through. We checked out and went AWOL. But now, I'm here as a bridge between that generation that fought for freedom and your generation that now must build the country of our dreams. So there is no space for apathy when we are building. Hey, you've got to bring that brick and someone brings the electrical wires and so on. There's no time to be apathetic. And you are a generation that's got it all. You've got the education, you've got the technological tools, you've got the knowledge which is connecting you to every corner of the world. So what's up?
Great passing words for our city. What's up, Durban? Let's build this thing. We'd really love to give space for some of you to ask Mamphela some questions. So we've got a roaming microphone. If any of you have a question for her, please just put up your hand and we'll get the microphone to you.
It's such a pleasure, Dr. Ramphele, to meet you. I've actually been inspired by and interested in your life story ever since I first read Stephen Biko's book, I Write What I Like. In fact, I even have one of my favorite poems I wrote myself, actually, is based on the title of that book. But what I would like to find out from you is I work in the community development space, and I get very frustrated. I think you expressed it well when you said that we've sold our mind to the government, but people can't seem to do anything for themselves anymore. The government must provide everything. So I get very frustrated, but that book provides glimpses of what could be done differently. I have two questions for you. The first is around black consciousness as a movement in South Africa today. We've seen parties that purport, political parties that purport to further the aims of black consciousness, and they've really imploded and haven't amounted to much. What's your view of how black consciousness is expressed and practiced in South Africa today compared to what your generation in the 70s and before, compared to what your generation saw it being? The second question that I have for you is, I listened to a radio program that you featured on, and unfortunately I didn't get an answer to this question, but someone asked you, someone there, it might have been a comment after you made your presentation, someone there said, all these new political parties that spring up, be they movements or whatever, all they do is split the opposition vote and end up strengthening the ANC or the ruling party. What is your response to that? That's what I'd like to know.
Okay, with the black consciousness movement, I think, as I said earlier on, the purpose is freeing the mindset. But we now live in a democracy, a constitutional democracy that we fought for. And when I say we, I mean collectively. Each one of us, the religious community, the students, the workers, everybody fought for this freedom. And the greatest sin we made was to say the ANC freed us. That's the biggest mistake we made, because that's the handing over of agency to somebody. Now, the people who claim sole custodianship of the Black consciousness movement are doing the Black consciousness movement a great disservice. What we need now, yes, we still have to deal with Black inferiority, which is reinforced by this underperforming educational system, and the growing inequality, because education is the greatest social leveler. And the more you have an underperforming education, the more you fulfill the stereotypes. Because the majority of people who get bad education will happen to be poor and Black. And so my sense is that what we need now is a South African consciousness, which helps Black people to deal with the vestiges of inferiority, but white people to also deal with the vestiges and not so vestiges of white superiority. But an important element of it is that one of the gaps in our transition to democracy is not dealing with the sequelae of planned impoverishment of Black people. You know, the Germans, when they unified East and West Germany, they imposed a tax on the West Germans to make sure that they close the gap between East and West Germany. Are you surprised that Angela Merkel is now the Chancellor of Germany? It's because they invested in equality. We didn't invest in equality. So there is still a lot of work that we need to do to deal with that. So that's my view. I don't think we really should be embedding race consciousness in our society, but we should not deny the reality of racism still having an impact on us. The question of small parties or new parties, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that was not the intention for us to have a small party that competes with other small parties. But as they say, sometimes bad things happen for a good reason. We spent 6 months negotiating with the DA to work with them to make sure that we have a strong opposition platform. But it's not easy to forge a relationship in that context. Helen and I, tomorrow, we can go into the sunset and work together because we've worked together before. But the institutional transformation, going back to UCT was a good university, but it had to be made great by shedding the chauvinist white male label, which came from its history. It started as a boys' college. The same thing with the DA, the struggle to let go of control. But I think that detour and the establishment of AHANG has actually given South Africans a fresh start, a way of looking at themselves honestly, and not, AHANG has got Black, white people, old, young. We are a truly South African non-racial party. But we recognize your point. What's needed for the 2014 election is working together, collaboration within the opposition parties. The common purpose should be to bring the ANC down below 50% because we don't have another chance. 5 more years of this undermining of every institution of our constitution. We will be like Uncle Bob's country. And that's another reason why I got out of my slippers, because I realized that a lot of South Africans think that you can have a staged change. You just look at what's going on with Judge Hlophe's trial. Very highly respected constitutional court judges have just decided they don't want to get into this thing. Why? They're afraid. And you look at what's happening with the police, you look at what's happening with the NPA, we have an urgent need to change this government. And it's got to happen in 2014, and it is possible. All it takes is the one person out of the 6 who voted for them not to vote for them. Then we had 50. Then we get another one, we bring them down to 40%. It's possible.
Good. I'd love a few more questions. Greg.
Citizen Ramphele.
Yes, sir, citizen.
The thing that won my heart to your cause was the fact that you don't rely on titles like doctor or comrade or goko or whatever it might be. And I so appreciate that. Could you talk to the dismantling of those types of titles?
You know, authoritarian systems love titles. We've got doctors who got an honorary degree from the University of Putaditswedi. You know? Why? I mean, nobody in any other part of the world uses doctor when it's an honorary degree. You only use it when you have sweated for it. But even that is not necessary. My grandmother, my name is my grandmother's name. I love being called Mamphela. That's it. It's very simple, not complicated. But you've got to have the self-confidence not to rely on titles. Second, this comrade story. It's a way of creating an inner circle that romanticizes the struggle. Suddenly, people who were not even born are comrades, veterans. So we really have to liberate the politics of this country into politics of the future and make decisions for future generations, not just for us today. But the language is important in carrying the values. If you believe in those 3 pillar values of our Constitution, dignity, equality, and freedom, okay, so why should I be Dr. Span, when we are equal? We should really be engaging, connecting at that spiritual level. That's what makes friendship so wonderful.
Beautiful, thank you. We've got a few time for one or two more. You guys happy with that? One more over there.
Hello, hi. Wow, I just lost my words, and I just want to say firstly, I was invited by my colleague, friend, Kelly, here. She met me in the corridors this morning, and she told me about the story session, and I got so excited and electrified because I wanted to come here and get some inspiration from someone like you. I look up to women like yourself, Precious Motsepe, and I say, when I'm 64, I want to look as pretty as you. But anyways, I just wanted you to just say to us, how do you speak to, you're an inspirational, not young anymore, but you were an inspirational young black woman who stepped out and did something that probably most women at your age and your generation would never thought to do. It was never something that was on a prospectus in any university. You graduate, you become a young doctor, and you sort of get lost in the system of, now I need to decide where I'm going to specialize. You specialize, you work hard. The Department of Health works us like slaves, and you never really, not every single person gets to collide with their calling or their call of duty in the world and how they are called to make a change. And I just recently noticed, especially with young black girls, teenagers that come into our hospitals pregnant, and you ask them questions like, what happened? Or what's the plan for your life? What do you want to become? And none of them, well, very few of them have answers to that question. Some of them are like para 5, and they were teenage mothers, and today they're just mothers. I'd just really like for you to speak to a young woman in South Africa to say, how do you sort of break out of this is my profession and this is what I will do, I am doctor forever, and sort of become the I don't have the words, but to just become who God had an idea about each and every individual, and it's not something that we've seen before. It's not something that the world knows about. We're all going to become something that the world is seeing for the very first time. Like, you never knew you would become like this. I don't know what I'm going to become. And I just find that it gets difficult when you are in a place where I personally feel, sorry, I'm blabbing along. I personally feel like I'm in a hot seat, I'm uncomfortable, I'm not, I want to know how, I don't know if you understand my question. It's not really...
I hear you. I think what you are wrestling with is a way of making sense of where you are and where you want to be and how to connect the two. And I think one of the gifts we had was face-to-face encounters. There were 15 of us as friends. And during the week, we'll be going to school and so on, except for Steve, who never was in class. But we spend the weekends together really wrestling with these questions, okay? And what's missing, I think, in today's world is that we've become very atomized. And then we are on Mixit and Twitch. It's never the same thing as the eyeball-to-eyeball thing, okay? So we need to create time, in our families to break bread together, but also time for you, even in your busy life, to be able to engage with your peers, not necessarily doctors, but others from outside, because you need to really have that cross-pollination. The issue of young teenage mothers, it's an age-old thing. It goes back to the primary cardinal sin of this country, education. I'm yet to find a young girl in a high-performance school who chooses to be pregnant. Doesn't work. Unless she's a product of an abusive family setup, and those happen. I mean, when you have 8-year-olds who are pregnant, they couldn't have gone out to say, I want to have sex. That's not possible. And so I think we need to create nodes of sanity around ourselves and draw the energy from the people around us. But I also, in my life, have always had white, older men as my mentors, coaches, spiritual counselors. And it's not that I went out to seek them, but somehow they came my way. Like my science teacher became my career guide. And then in my life in the wilderness, including Helen, I didn't answer the Helen Suzman question. Helen Suzman just came to visit me when I was out there in Zanin. And she fell in love with the fact that I was not sitting there and crying about my circumstance, but working and practicing my medical profession. And the beauty about the medical profession is that it really is a leadership profession. And it forces you to take responsibility, to be accountable, to be, you have to connect to people, otherwise you can't be a doctor. So she also became part of my circle of older people who were my friends. Now Helen's strength, and this is what makes me really sad about the rewriting of history in this country. She did more for political prisoners, people who were banished, people who were imprisoned, than any other single human being in this country. And that is something that we owe to her, to thank her for it. I had the privilege of also becoming a friend, so I could get close to her. But the long and short of my answer is that seek friends across boundaries. And that's a great strength. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mamphela, from myself, from Story Sessions, from Durban, we just want to thank you for living such a great story and for inspiring us about the possibility that we as citizens of this country, an amazing country, that the story that we can live. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for making yourself available. We really love you, and thank you for sharing your heart with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Tonight was really enjoyable, and I really just think that for somebody who's trying to start a political party, she wasn't trying to get us to join a political party, but really encouraging us to take ownership as citizens, and I've really been encouraged by that.
I think this is one of the most inspirational women to come along, and I hope that she inspires the young people, because that's who we need to have become part of and participate in this country.
For me, it was just so good to see sort of royalty, South African royalty, if you could call it that. Sort of the woman who sort of revolutionized medicine in South Africa, the woman who still can revolutionize South Africa. I think she's absolutely brilliant.
For me personally, it's inspired me in a greater degree to become an active citizen, a person who might not just complain about the current state of our country, but actually stand up and make a difference with my hands, with my words, with my very life itself. So for me, it's been inspiring in a way where it's empowered me. There's an empowerment inside of me that says I can actually make a difference, whether politically or day to day on the streets. This country has a hope and it can change.
You want to talk about it? I think just like an innovative way of how she brought light onto a lot of political issues that I think day to day we take for granted, and just an awareness to really impact and speak to people around us to really make them understand of how much difference we actually can make.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful things for me is that everybody in South Africa seems to come from a certain position, and by holding that position they isolate others that are not necessarily in the same place. And one of the most powerful things to me was that she seems to be able to access all and every position.
I think it was just very refreshing to hear a lady with such immense integrity, and a lady who's walked the walk and who's actually struggled, who's lived and been in a struggle. It was very insightful, and it was just a fantastic platform to hear a lady's heart, and it was a fantastic evening. One of the highlights I think for me was getting a copy signed of her book for my son Noah, and the message that she wrote was, "Noah, with love and hope for your generation." So yeah, it's really amazing to see a lady who's got that much integrity, and to hear her heart and to hear what she stands for. It's a very exciting time, I think.
I think it's a very good idea to have people telling their stories, because we all live our stories and we need to find a way of telling them, and in the process you get the energy from others to carry your story forward. Okay? Thank you.